So for this video, I'm going to talk about my July wrap-up, all of the books that I managed to read in the month of July. And there's a lot of books to talk about in this month because we did Battle of the Bands 4 movie soundtracks in the month of July. And wouldn't you know it, my team won again. It's back-to-back. So I'm assuming that the next Battle of the Bands, which will probably be April next year, my team will be heavily attacked. Who knows? But yeah, it was a lot of fun regardless of who won. But yeah, I managed to read 21 books here. A lot of them, were very super short because, that's the easiest way to get points really for the readathon is just to read a bunch of short stuff. So, it's a lot of stuff that was like okay, but maybe not very memorable. But the best part of July for me was that I found 3 5-star books that weren't rereads. And if you've been paying attention on my channel, for the first half of the year, I really only had 1 5-star read, and that was Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. Possibly my favorite book of the year still. But in July, I did manage to find 3 5-star new favorites, and they were all new releases for authors that I love, so it did make a lot of sense. But yeah, I'm super excited to chat about these books, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I'm doing this in no particular order. I think probably just the order that I read them in. The first one I have is A Christmas Story by Jean Shepherd. And I read this one. It was very short on audio, like 3.5 hours. And this was obviously the inspiration for the classic A Christmas Story movie, which is a family tradition movie for me. We watch it every Christmas, at least once. But yeah, I was curious about this one, and this is not like the full book. I think this is kind of like just the stories and bits that are in the book that the movie used, and it makes sense a little bit. It was good. Like, I gave it 4 stars. Like, if you've never seen the movie, it's probably not worth reading, like, because it's not a lot happens, but like if you're a fan of the movie and you've seen the movie a lot, it's interesting to see what the movie took and what they left out. So for those bits, it was fun. Not like an all-time favorite. It was 4 stars. I also read 2 very short middle grade books called Trapped in a Video Game 1 and 2. I think that the second one was called like The Invisible something. Anyway, the first book, both of these books are by Dustin Brady also. Very short middle grade books. The first book was okay, kind of just introducing the idea of getting trapped in a video game. It was like 3.5 stars. It was a fun time, very short. The second book, however, I actually really liked. I gave it 4 stars. It kind of took that same premise, but of like, the first book was like them, two kids trapped in like an actual video game. But then the second one, it was kind of like a real life game. Like, it's not Pokemon Go, but it's kind of like that, where the kid is in that video game in real life, but he's invisible to everyone around him, but he's able to see and interact with all of the stuff that people are like on their phone and devices, that they can see everything. So it was a pretty cool concept. I liked it. I'm not sure if I will continue with the series. I might do it next year for readathons because they're very short and they are fun. But yeah, the second one was much better in my opinion, and I gave it 4 stars. I also read Coraline by Neil Gaiman, and I wasn't really expecting much with this one because I've tried a few Neil Gaiman, and I just don't think he's the author for me personally. I liked one of his books, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I gave 3 stars. It was good, but not like fantastic. And then I DNF'd a couple of other ones. This one, Coraline, I gave 2.5 stars. I was just very bored the whole time. Nothing really intrigued me about anything. I didn't really connect, and I just wasn't intrigued by anything or the characters. So I really just was bored the whole time. So I gave it 2.5 stars. I probably, at this point, will not read any more Neil Gaiman. Sorry, Chaz. And then I read Lisa Jewell's new book, Breaking the Dark. And this one, I kind of was not expecting to give 5 stars because even though I love Lisa Jewell and I've given most of her books 5 stars, this one is a bit different. It's supposed to be a Jessica Jones Marvel book, and it's supposed to be kind of the start of a new set of Marvel books written by popular thriller authors. So I was like, even though I love Lisa Jewell, I'm not a big superhero fan. I'm not, especially like modern superhero stuff, I just can't really get into. But this one surprised me, and it really shouldn't have because Lisa Jewell's amazing. But I did give this book 5 stars. So one of the favorites that I've read, not in July, not even in July, but through all of the, man, I cannot talk. This is one of the best books I've read all year. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it was great. Not a rough start, but at the beginning I was like, I'm not sure I'm gonna really get into this book. I was intrigued, but by the middle of the book I was hooked, and then the ending was great. I loved this book. I could definitely see myself rereading it in the future, and I'm doubly excited to read what I think is the next book in the Marvel universe, whatever they're doing. It's going to be a book based off of Luke Cage, who I don't really know much about, but S.A. Cosby, one of my all-time favorite authors, new favorite authors, is going to write that one. So definitely excited to check that one out. But Breaking the Dark, Jessica Jones book, loved it, gave it 5 stars. And then the book I read just after that, I was also maybe on the fence about giving 5 stars to, but I was definitely hopeful that I would love this book. And I did. And that would be Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. And yes, I gave this book 5 stars. Probably my favorite book that I read in July. And overall, probably my second favorite book that I've read all year. Still just behind Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. And if you don't know, I did release my ranking of all 8 Riley Sager books. I did that a couple weeks ago on my channel. And spoiler alert, this one is pretty high on the list. It's definitely one of my favorites. I think I'm tending to like new Riley Sager books because a few of his older books I really didn't get along with, but this one was just great from start to finish. I was intrigued the whole time. I wanted to know what happened, and it was really great. The ending was great. The characters were awesome. I really had no complaints with this book, so definitely check this one out if you're a big Riley Sager fan. I loved it and gave it 5 stars. My Patreon read for the month of July was chosen by Coleridge Girl, and the book that she wanted me to read was The Mailman by Bentley Little. And this one intrigued me initially because I am a mailman, so having a villain be a mailman was very fun. And this book, I wasn't really sure what to think about this book going into it. All I knew basically was the premise that the mailman is a bad guy. So I didn't really know what direction it would go in, but it kind of felt kind of similar to Needful Things by Stephen King. And actually these books came out like right around the same time, so it's not like he copied Stephen King or anything. But it definitely felt like the mailman, he wasn't, at first he wasn't like outright doing anything like evil, but he was doing little things here and there to mess with the townspeople. And it was great. And obviously it spiraled from there. And it was a lot of fun. There were some things that I'm not like a big fan of horror-wise. I won't get into it, but towards the end of the book, I'm like, that's kind of icky. I don't really like that kind of horror. But overall, it was a very fun book. I did enjoy the villain. And overall, a very fun horror book. So I gave it 4 stars. I also read Zen in the Art of Faking It by Jordan Sonnenblick, one of my all-time favorite authors. He's a middle grade author, obviously of Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, one of my all-time favorite books. And I've read a lot of his books, at this point in my life, and they definitely all kind of have the same vibe to them where you're following, either like a middle school or a high school student, and they're going through some kind of struggle, and there's humor at times, and there's drama, and this one, I don't know if it's just it felt samey, but I don't know. It was fine. I did really enjoy it. It was 4 stars. I think probably my main complaint is that the main character of this one is probably one of the least compelling that I've read from Jordan Sonnenblick. Usually the main characters are all great. This one was okay. And overall the story was good. Just not one of my all-time favorite Jordan Sonnenblick books, but I still really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. This next book was recommended, well, maybe not recommended, but my buddy Ian from the channel Ian the Reader, his favorite book that he's read all year is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. So I wanted to check this one out, and it was available on Libby right away, so I just snatched that up on audio, and I listened to it, and I was curious to see if I would get along with it, because me and Ian, we have similar tastes, but other times we don't. So it's kind of interesting to see, which way I'll go. But for this one, I thought it was okay. And really, it kind of felt like a Cormac McCarthy book. And sometimes, I don't know, I told Ian, like, sometimes, like, I love horror books, but sometimes when it gets, like, super realistic and depressing and just not really a lot of fun, like, this book is not a fun read. And usually with books, I love it when books are just so much fun to read, but this one, I don't know. I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but like it was just very depressing. I was very bummed out reading this book, so I didn't really have a great time with it. The writing was good, and some of the characters were pretty interesting, but overall, definitely not a new favorite. I gave it 3 stars. I also read We Are Legion, which is the first Bob verse book by Dennis E. Taylor. Again, I've had this I had this on Audible for a very long time, but never checked it out. And this was actually picked for me to read by somebody in the Discord. I don't remember who, but every month I do a random number generator, 1 through 100, and whoever gets the closest gets to choose a book for me from my Goodreads TBR for me to read the following month. And this was the book that was chosen, which was very good because I needed to get to this book. It was fine. It started off good with this guy. Basically, he's in this tech company and he gets run over by a car. And in his will, it's basically like his consciousness gets to live on through some kind of computer generator thing. I'm butchering the technology here, but basically he awakes and he's basically not in a body. He's like just in a computer. And the story goes from there, and the story that he goes on is pretty interesting. But for me, like, towards the middle of the book, it gets very confusing and convoluted, and I had a hard time picturing everything that was happening, which can kind of be a turnoff for me for some sci-fi. Like, if I have a hard time picturing it in my mind, then I have a hard time engrossing myself into the story, which is why I kind of tend to like sci-fi movies more than sci-fi books sometimes if it gets really abstract. But yeah, it was good, and it had some humor to it. But overall, it was just okay. So I give it 3.5 stars. My next 5-star read was Stepping Off by Jordan Sonnenblick. Like I mentioned, one of my all-time favorite authors. And this book was his very new release that came out, I think, in June. And I wanted to wait until July because it was a short read. And yeah, it did not disappoint. I loved this book, had no complaints with it. And it also helped that Kirby Hayborn, my favorite narrator, narrated the audiobook. And I had a very fun time with this book. And this one kind of felt more YA, which, young adult can kind of go either way for me. But Jordan Sonnenblick normally writes kind of middle grade where, he does have the serious stuff, but then he definitely has a lot of goofy stuff to kind of mitigate the serious stuff. This one definitely just felt more YA. It had teenage characters, and it had a lot of depressing stuff in this book. But it was very good nonetheless. Very much enjoyed it, and one of my favorite books that I've read all year. I also read An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good, which is like a 3.5 hour audio that I found on Audible for free. And I used this for the prompt of like silly, ironic title, and the title, An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good. It is funny, and it is very fitting because it's about an old lady that goes around killing people. And it was a lot of fun. It wasn't perfect. Like and it's actually split up into, I think, 4 or 5 like short story novellas kind of compiled into one. Some of them I liked more than others. Like the first couple were very good, and then towards the middle, it was okay. But overall, it was a very fun book. I'm definitely going to listen to the sequel at some point. I might save it for another readathon because it's very short as well. But yeah, I had a good time with it. I gave it 4 stars. I also read a nonfiction book called Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? And this was a fun nonfiction. It's essentially about this mortician person who's writing the book, and she's answering kids' questions that they have about death. So they can be very silly, like the title suggests. Will my cat eat my eyeballs? And she'll explain it scientifically. And it was fun. Very short, like 4.5 hours, and yeah, I had a good time with it. Not like, and a couple of the things I already knew, so it wasn't like super informative, but it was fun nonetheless. I gave it 4 stars. I also read Against My Will, Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Stacy, my wife, the chapter conundrum, basically wanted me to read this book, this Adrian Tchaikovsky novella. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. And we made it a read along, essentially. And a few people in the Discord read it along with me. I had a good time with it. I didn't absolutely love it like she did. And I actually, and let me backtrack. It's definitely a novella that's worth jumping into not knowing anything, because it's one of those things where like you think you know what's happening and then something else happens and you're like, wait a minute, what's actually happening here? Until the very end, you realize what's actually going on. So it was fun in that aspect, although I did catch on very early kind of one of the twists that was happening. So it wasn't like mind blowing for me, but it was still very good novella nonetheless, and I gave it 4 stars. I also read Witch by Ian Rob Wright, and at this point I've read 3 Ian Rob Wrights. Escape was definitely the best, and then Dark Ride was also pretty good. This one I liked significantly less, and I think the main reason was because for whatever reason, Ian Rob Wright is just not very good at writing kid characters. And basically the main characters of this very short book are kid characters, and they were just not very believable at all. And there's authors that I've read that are really good at writing kid characters, like Stephen King, George R. R. Martin. So, when people butcher kid characters, it's really bad. And this one, while the story itself was somewhat interesting, like the kid characters were just very annoying and not very believable. Yeah, I don't know. And just overall, it's definitely my least favorite Ian Rob Wright. And also, it was very confusing because this is supposed to be the first book in the Cursed Manuscript series, but in none of this book were there cursed manuscripts. So I don't know what's going on with that. I probably will not read any more in this series. But yeah, I'll definitely check out more Ian Rob Wright, but I'll probably just stay away from this series in general. This one was okay. I gave it 3 stars. And definitely the worst book that I managed to read in the month of July. And probably I would have DNF'd this book if it wasn't for the readathon. And that would be Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I had seen the movie several years ago and enjoyed it. It wasn't like an all-time favorite. So I obviously knew like the story, and I knew like the main twist. So I wasn't reading it, for that. But I was curious to see, because it's always interesting to see how movie adaptations, like what they take from the book and what they exclude. It felt pretty much like a good adaptation, but just the writing style for me, I really did not get along with. I can't even really describe it, but it was just annoying. Like I can't pinpoint what I didn't like about it, but I was just listening to this audiobook and I was just like, I do not care. But yeah, and I've also tried to read Chuck Palahniuk in the past. He does not really seem like an author I'm going to get along with. So yeah, this one was definitely a big disappointment, and I just did not get along with it. I gave it 2 stars. I also read another nonfiction book called 10 Days in a Madhouse by Neely Bly, and this was actually written in like the very late 1800s, I think in the 1890s. It's essentially about a woman named Neely Bly who's a journalist, and she basically disguises herself as an insane person so that she can gain access inside an insane asylum and just basically see how the patients are treated and how everything is running. And she does, and you get in there and you realize just how awful this place is. And then when she gets out, she does some good to try to, make the insane asylum a better place to be. But the details of like what actually was going on and how they treated everybody, pretty awful. So it was an interesting read for that reason. I gave it 4 stars. I did enjoy it. And I did have another 5-star book, but this one was a reread. I already knew it was going to be 5 stars, one of my all-time favorites. And that would, of course, be Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Classic for a reason. And this was our this was our pick for July for the Ray Bradbury book club that I'm running. So definitely check that out on the Bookstore Discord. We had a ton of people read this book. I think either rereads or for the very first time. I think it was mostly positive. I think a lot of people really did enjoy this, which makes me happy. Definitely one of my favorites by him. And if you haven't read it, and if you're unaware, it's basically a dystopian novel from like the early 1950s where this society decides to burn books because they don't want people reading and they don't really want people thinking for themselves. They don't want to think critically. And you basically follow this firefighter whose job is to go around burning books. But he meets some people along the way who, have books, and he kind of discovers books, and the story goes from there. It's really good, really riveting. I just love Ray Bradbury, and this is one of his best for a reason. So yeah, 5 stars very easily. I also read Age of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the second book in the Legends of the First Empire series, which we are doing a read-along for, by the way. Started in June with Age of Myth, and Age of Swords is book 2. I did like this more upon a reread. When I did my first initial read, this was definitely my least favorite, and it probably still is. It's the longest book in the series, and it definitely, well, it's not like super long. It does feel a little bit long-winded. Overall, the series is pretty short. Like, this is a 20-hour audiobook, and it's the longest in the series. So, overall, not very long for a fantasy series. This one, like I said, definitely felt a little bit more long-winded. You definitely get more character perspectives, which I do like. But the first book kind of has, like, Wraith and Malcolm almost at the center point, really. And I really love their dynamic. And they're kind of less so in this book. They are present, but definitely less so. And overall, the story I just felt was less compelling than the first book. It's still a great series, and this is definitely a great book. And I did like it more upon a reread. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And if you're curious, next month in August, we're going to be reading Age of War. So if you want to catch up, it might be a little bit too late now, but we are reading the 3rd book in August. So if you want to go back and read the first 2 and join along with us, definitely welcome to do that. Another book that I was heavily anticipating was I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. His new book that I think came out in July, but I ended up reading... Oh, wait, no, yeah. It came out in July, and I read it in July. Duh. But yeah, I really did enjoy this book. Not perfect, but almost perfect. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I'm so glad that this one was really good because some of his newer books haven't been like on par with some of my all-time favorites by him, but this one I could definitely see myself rereading and maybe bumping it up to 5 stars, kind of knowing what the story is and how it goes. But yeah, overall I did really enjoy it. I enjoyed the main character, and yeah, it was just very good. So I gave it 4.5 stars. And the last book that I managed to read in the month of July was the 3rd Dexter book, Dexter in the Dark. And this one I did like a bit less than the second one. I read the second one either a month or 2 ago, and I really liked it. Definitely departed a little bit from the main story, which was fine because it was interesting to see how it went. This 3rd book, however, really goes off in a different direction. I won't spoil it, but it's got some instances where I'm like, I don't know if I love this, but it is interesting to see. It's basically, I'm just treating this kind of like as an alternate universe to the Dexter lore, because Dexter's one of my all-time favorite shows. I love it. And this one I'm just going to treat and I'm just going to assume that this is just like a Dexter multiverse where things are just going to go nuts. And I'm going to continue with the series and just see where it goes. But yeah, I still liked it. I gave it 4 stars, but I liked it a little, or actually a lot less than the second book. I really liked the second book. Whew. All right, so those are all of the books that I managed to read in the month of July. I believe that's 21 books. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. But yeah, overall I had a fantastic month, and I finally got some more 5-star reads, which I was looking forward to, hopefully. And so now I believe I have 4 5-star reads, Just Like Home, Breaking the Dark, Stepping Off, and Middle of the Night. So hopefully this streak will continue in August and for the rest of the year. Hopefully I can find more 5-star reads. And definitely let me know what were your favorite books that you read in July, and let me know if you've read any of these books that I read and what you thought about them. And of course, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and continue to subscribe to the Bookish Drummer and the Bookish Drummer Discord if you're not already a part of that, where we got a bunch of stuff going on, and potentially we're going to be starting a Stephen King book club starting in October. So, stay tuned for that. I'll announce that later. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a fantastic day.